Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome to Mr. Jeffrey Lambert, coming in all the way from, is it Chicago, Illinois?
It is Chicago, Illinois.
The Blues Brothers County.
The Blues Brothers and the Bears, which had a good season this year, and now they gave all the players away.
Well, that happens, but does that mean they're rebuilding, or they've just taken an opportunity to get some more cash?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Right. Okay. Hey, Jeffrey, looking forward to this conversation. You're currently working at BlueFusion as a principal. You're a delivery strategist, leadership mentor, 30 years of experience, or over 30 years, working across multiple different organizations, leading high stakes initiatives. And I'm really looking forward to this because, as we were talking about before I press record, I typically talk to sales leaders who are directly in sales or technologists that are directly in sales. You're from a project management office, so we're going to have a slightly different view on sales, but I think it's going to be a really relevant conversation, certainly for sales leaders who are looking to create some differentiation in the marketplace and the importance of partnering with project management and the PMO in certainly big high stakes deals. So before we talk about that, and there's lots of topics we would love to cover, I always love to get a bit of background from the guests. And so where did it start from you? You've been at a number of different organizations. What has prompted you to get into this space, and what keeps you excited about being in this space?
So the first third of my career I spent in IT, a lot of infrastructure as well as writing code, and I got exposure to projects that went well and others that were very elongated, and so it interested me, and I had an opportunity to get into project management. Shifted really into overseeing software development teams and data teams, and of course sitting right down the hall was the PMO office, and that job was vacated, and someone said, "You would be good at this," and I said, "Okay, well." And that was approximately 15 years ago, and with that came the advent of going from client server applications to web development and web portals. Did a lot of things with marketing and sales teams, specifically in the financial industry, brokerage firms, and then in the last 8 to 10 years, the advent and the popularity of SaaS platforms. So, but again, being a PMO lead, a program lead, an engagement lead of implementing software as a service.
Love that.
And so really my interest has been having worked with all those different areas in IT, but then also on the business side as a liaison, was as a program manager, being able to empower other people to do their jobs well. And what did that mean? It meant building relationships.
Love that. And we always talk about, in sales in particular, the power of service and building those relationships, particularly in the world of AI. It's also interesting that the most sales leaders that I speak with, the vast majority of them fell into sales. They didn't actually wake up one day and say, "Wow, I think I'm going to be a salesperson." And interestingly, your career trajectory, which you just shared, is you didn't necessarily wake up one day and say, "I think I'm going to be a principal within a PMO office." Somebody said, "Hey, I think you're going to be good at this." So again, you've probably fallen into it as well. But looking back on it, not saying it is it the best thing you've done, but I believe everything happens for a reason. So what's been the biggest, I guess, aha moment or biggest lesson over the last, say, 15 years being in the role that you do, as it relates to implementations, delivery, but also customer retention?
Sure. Um, wow. So I would say the biggest takeaway is really getting a lot of that groundwork done right up front, making sure that there's a good framework and governance in place, making sure that people understand their roles and responsibilities, and that's at all levels. So at the
Mm,
operational execution level, the tactical, um, and also executive leadership, who is essentially your executive stakeholders or steering committee. And but everyone's got to be drinking the same Kool-Aid. They've got to be on the same page. People need to understand what is the scope, what are we delivering, and let's stay within those guardrails.
mm,
And then within that, then the big aha moment for me was probably a couple years into it was when I was running large scale enterprise programs that yes, I was responsible for everything that's happening under that umbrella, but also more importantly was the huge satisfaction I got, the drive was I was empowering other people, enabling other people to do what they do well.
mm.
And and so that made me feel good from the standpoint of really giving people stretch goals and seeing people perform.
I love that. And as a principal within a PMO, how do you see the role in relation to the delivery or the whole customer interaction ecosystem? For example, because I want to talk about the interaction with sales at what stage of the buying process, what are some of the challenges that might happen, but just at a high level, the role that you play in the PMO, how do you see that role integrating with the sales team and therefore the delivery that creates the experience for the customer?
So I think it's important that the PMO director, the PMO manager has a relationship with the head of the sales group so that earlier before we went live here, we talked about, the cost of having people involved outside of a sales organization to help with contract details,
Mm,
negotiation, et cetera. And that's a cost that necessarily isn't available to be able to be covered. Um, just being able to have quick hallway conversations or quick phone calls to keep each other in the loop and say, hey, we're going through this right now. Would you mind taking a quick look at this verbiage?
mm,
And that's a start. And and it's building that liaison between the two groups. So at least there's a heads up. And the heads up goes both ways because the PMO can say, well, you know what? Hey, have you thought about this?
mm,
And remember that deal we did with XYZ company? Go back and look at that because this is similar.
mm. It's an interesting point because my own experience, having worked in some big Australian organizations, was the PMO or the project management or the delivery arm of the organization was often kept separate, and they're brought in in many cases too late in the process, and that created lots of different challenges and lots of different problems, particularly when you had a salesperson or a sales leader or a group of salespeople making some promises that either the technical delivery arm or the project management office had to somehow create a miracle.
Right, right. I can make the baby in 5 months. No, no, you can't.
That's right.
um, yeah, and I've seen those situations as well. And you do have to get creative, and you get creative where sometimes without getting into the weeds, the
Mm,
details are you find one of the sharpest people in network architecture, and you tell them, guess what? Normally you have 2 weeks to do it. You got to get it done in a week, and
mm,
you do things to make that work. You try to build upon past experiences and repurposing certain things, um, and you build upon people's expertise and challenging them to meet the needs and the scope of the customer.
yeah. So with that, Jeffrey, based on your experience, because I'd love to talk about some specifics in terms of some best practices and how sales leaders in particular can work more hand in hand, probably as early in the process as possible or as feasible, so that it means the delivery phase of a contract is a little bit more seamless than possible. Um, what are some of the high level, I guess, challenges or obstacles that you've observed in the work that you've been doing that does prevent, or at least puts a bit of an obstacle in the pathway of a good implementation, um, for certainly for a big organization?
I think the toughest thing is on day one when you have a handoff, even if the handoff is well orchestrated and you're handed, the book, the contract, and yeah, it says, okay, here's what we're delivering, here's your allocation for resources, here's your budget, but you don't know what conversations have been had. And so to be able to have a listening session with a couple key people who were in the rooms during the negotiations, just for a download, is
Mm,
super helpful before I myself, if I'm the lead or one of the team members, goes in to start setting up discovery workshops or whatever is, if you're doing a ready assessment. But you don't know what has been discussed, and so therefore you may not always know what questions to ask. And if you have that prep, you are better aligned with your sales team when you go in front of your client.
mm. So why do you think organizations don't bring people like you in early enough? Is it cost? Is it an oversight? Is it ignorance? Is it something else? Because as we were talking before you press record, I said to you, hey, all of this sounds like it's founded in common sense. And why wouldn't we do this? So, but often it's a challenge of things like costs, or what's your experience in relation to some of the things that does prevent that from getting too involved too early?
So I think it's all of the above. I think it's in certain instances it's certainly cost. Hey, if we bring them in, we got to pay them. So if the sales team, if they bring in people from the project or the technical team, we need to allocate hours for that. I think it's also at times culture.
Mm,
Um, well, we've always done it this way, and no one's really brought it up about changing how we do this. The size of a corporation or a company can definitely have an impact on what can be done as far as moving the needle and changing how things are done. It's definitely easier in a smaller, lower level mid cap type company. You start getting up into a company that's 700 million up to into the lower Fortune 1000 and even Fortune 500. It's a bit more difficult. In the Fortune 500 companies, they're pretty mature and they're pretty embedded as far as proven out processes. And
mm.
so my experience has been with those, typically you do have some points of contact to be involved and engaged. Uh, Usually during the contract review when it's going through the iterations, that they'll pull different people. Hey, I need for you to look at this section.
Yeah. But as we're looking thinking about this, I'm just reflecting on some big deals that I was involved in a number of years ago, and the ones that worked really well, the ones that ended up delivering profitably according to timelines, customer satisfaction was high, were the deals and the implementations where we had somebody involved throughout I guess, the pre-sales process that almost became like a consultant as part of the sales team, but they weren't a salesperson. They had a different level of credibility that gave, in many cases, the customer comfort that should they proceed with this implementation, and often these were quite complex, then they had a person who they could rely on, who could be trustworthy, to lead them through the implementation and help them go over some of the roadblocks that might be placed in their way. So the handover then becomes so important, but the handover becomes a little bit more seamless if you had somebody involved in the pre-sales process, not just after the contract has been done.
Right. So I worked at, so as an example, when I worked at Cap Gemini, all right, as an engagement delivery manager, I was brought in at an estimated time of 2 weeks before they were closing it, so that then I was brought alongside and understood what was taking place and could uh, provide feedback into things like resourcing. What's his timeline look like? What are some of the risks that exist? What are some questions that haven't been asked? And to contribute to the refinement before it was finally signed off on. And then also meeting people,
Mm.
being introduced, developing those relationships so that then there is a smooth transition as you go into your project kickoff.
And did you find that that 2 week period was enough runway? Or were you thinking, geez, it would have been nice to have like 2 months, not 2 weeks?
So ideally, you'd like to be there from day one, of course. And so for me, having the 2 weeks, I made the very best of it. And amidst all my other responsibilities, because sometimes I could be pulled into two or three of these at a time, at
Yeah,
a busy time.
yeah,
And so you do a lot of reading of documents, and really trying to make the very best that you can of the meetings that you are brought into, being prepared and socializing things in advance, so that you are getting good dialogue, good feedback, and not waiting.
yeah. And so with that, how many times that you've come across where perhaps you might have been given that 2 week window, or perhaps less, or sometimes more, where you've had to come in and almost either resell or maybe quantify or qualify the promises that have been made by sales? Because there's a thing called scope creep. There's a thing called misinterpreted expectations or promises that have been made that
Sure.
perhaps are not reality. Um, what's
So
your
I don't know
experience with
what
that?
the exact number would be, but I mean it definitely took place and happened, and it was more than a half a dozen times over my period of time of doing this. And but the key thing to remember is anytime we would identify those sort of things is first off talk amongst our own team before we address this with the client or the prospect, of course. But um, when we identify those things, then much like if you're an employee at a company and you find a problem and you go to your manager doesn't want to hear about a problem unless you've got options or solutions. It's the same thing,
Hmm.
right? If I'm going to come to the table and say, all right, this was discussed that we would deliver this by this date, but we're not going to be able to do that. Here's what we can do by this date, or we can decouple something else and still bring this functionality in. So it's providing options, it's providing something that's been well thought through and really applying some critical thinking to it, versus picking something out of the sky.
It's interesting because it points to the, I guess, the credibility of the whole organization. And I'd love you to then talk about, I guess, the credibility factor that somebody from the PMO can actually provide that, in your words, becomes almost like a secret weapon for the selling organization if it's done well. Because often there'll be a delivery event or a sales kickoff event where we've signed the contract, we're now going into delivery phase, and often that's when the PMO is introduced into the implementation phase. But how do you guys become the secret weapon? And what's the work that you can do to, I guess, create new opportunities moving forward for both the customer but also the selling organization?
Sure. Well, right up front, the very first thing is to take that contract, and as a project team, the core team is to break it down and build out a very quick 1 or 2 page charter. In Six Sigma, it'll be referred to as like an 8 pack, but it's not a 40 or 50 page charter. This is something that it has the key elements of it in 1 or 2 pages, and you get that dialed in. You make sure that you've got your framework in place of as I mentioned before, if you picture a triangle, you've got your execution team, in the middle is tactical managers, and then the top is executive leadership. This is your governance model, it's your communications model. And once you get all those organized in the first week or two, and then you're communicating this out to the client in advance of an actual project kickoff, you're showing that you've got organization. You're showing that you understand how, as a team, how to engage. You develop an org chart that's called two in the box, where so you've got your counterpart in every single functional and technical role, both on the client side as well. And so once you get that organization in place, you're building up trust and confidence. Then with everyone signed off in an agreement of that scope, now you present at the kickoff, okay, here's what we're going to do across the next 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, okay, so that they understand and understand what expectations are and what their involvement is. As you go through the course of a project timeline, much like keeping track of risk and issues, keeping track of decisions in a log, an action item log, I will also keep an opportunities list.
Hmm.
So things that we've identified. You also have things where people will bring it up and they'll say, okay, well, I thought we were going to get this feature. Well, no, it's not in the scope, but it can be a future enhancement. Now, if you want it really badly enough, then we may have to trade something out. But you're managing that scope, but you're also identifying things. Hey, I can do a cross sell or an upsell here.
Mm.
Depending on the organization, then I keep the sales team informed. And I
Mm.
say, hey, look, here's what's happening. Okay, we have an opportunity to do an add-on to this contract.
And you find, because you talk about the first 30 days being really critical, and it's an opportunity to almost resell to the buyer, but allow the buyer to reaffirm their purchase decision as a good one. And in that phase, do you find that the credibility you bring to the implementation, and certainly in the eyes of the customer, makes it easier to sell without selling? And that is, do you find that customers in the implementation phase bring up things like, well, we wanted this feature, I thought we're getting that, and they're more open to share with you because they're not believing or thinking that there's going to be a sales close coming in that early phase?
So I believe I understand your question. And so when you build off of that scope document and then you start going into your workshops, you're going through and you're clarifying section by section each of the features, each of the capabilities. And sometimes a lot of this gets lost in the weeks of closing on a contract. There's all this verbiage, there's pages and pages of contract. And so when you boil it down and simplify it and basically walk through it, give a walkthrough and make sure everybody understands, hey, and we do have to make a decision here. All right.
Mm,
You may have some key design decisions and you document those. You create an energy. You create a level of confidence and excitement that amongst the entire project team, but certainly the client. They're like, okay, we made the right decision, and we feel good about this, and you're gaining momentum. Especially if it's a SaaS implementation. So with a SaaS implementation, what takes place is, within the first 2 to 4 weeks after you've done the kickoff, you're starting your sprints of
mm,
configuration. So you start the first 2 week sprint, and by the end of that first 2 weeks, they're getting a demo on those particular category of features. And then you got another 2 week sprint, another 2 week sprint, and they know at any point in time, they being the client, that they can step in and they can maybe adjust some things. And it's an iterative process. So they still are a part of it. They still own it. And by having that clarity, that transparency, and having a regular cadence of meetings, keeping people informed, and also you bring that one pager scope up on a very frequent basis so people keep seeing it and they keep remember, yes, this is our grounding point. This is, what's the burning platform? What is it that we're fixing? what is the solution going to do for us? What are the benefits? What are the objectives? How are we going to get there? And it's all on one page, and then you continue.
And that's such an important thing because through the implementation phase, I know there'll be sales people that sort of drift off into the background and hand it over to you and expect you to run it, and they're off doing other things. And keeping everybody on the same page and everybody involved and having that source of truth is such an important thing. Because you do talk about the that deals don't necessarily fail in the delivery. They tend to fail in the transition where perhaps organizations don't have that source of truth. They don't have the clear expectations, both from the selling organization but also the customer organization. And I think that's where your role is such a pivotal one and an important one, where you're almost like the glue that brings everything together, but you're also the voice of reason as to what's practical versus what perhaps has been a promise that maybe a salesperson made to try and get the deal over the line.
Well, and, and we're also orchestrators because while we may not have input and influence over how the sales process goes, we can certainly um, make our voice known as far as we want to be involved in this handoff, but we want to keep you apprised of what's happening. And so, we're going to do a report out every couple of weeks to keep you guys involved and so that sales knows what's happening. In addition to that, though, you had mentioned, at what point in time should a sales team engage a PMO? Well,
Mm,
the other thing is, and of course, I'm speaking here about things like, software implementations, SaaS implementations, et cetera,
yeah.
but it applies to any type of change that's going to take place across an enterprise. It can be facilities, it could be a construction project, et cetera, is organizational change management. So organizational change management for many years was, it'd be it might be a month before go live, and someone say, "Hey, did someone talk to OCM?" and and now today it's becoming very strong in a lot of companies and the cultures that OCM starts on day one with the PMO. I always make sure that the OCM is aligned, and so that then they can start conducting their assessments, and we can see what's the long pole in the tent. All right, well,
Mm,
typically on the technical side it's usually data, okay, but how does that impact these changes, these process changes? How are those going to impact people's jobs? And so then you get your OCM team involved for communications, training, and getting ready for go live, and then the hypercare and the support. So that's another piece of it, because if you don't have that, and as a program manager, as a project team, and you don't have the end user community feeling nice and warm and fuzzy about this change, and something goes sideways, it's going to be really hard to recover from that, even if you've built up strong credibility.
yeah, and you could be the best project delivery specialist the world's ever seen, and because you've been let down by either a lack of communication, a lack of clarity, a lack of information, nothing's going to turn that around, which is fascinating. Which kind of brings back to the point that I often say to anybody that wants to listen, whether they're in sales or not, that literally every single person within an organization is part of the sales team. Now, some may not carry a quota. They might be responsible for a PMO. They might be responsible for design, post sales, customer service, whatever the case may be. But it's what you've just described there is such an important thing that people need to be aware of what projects we're working on, what opportunities we have, and how we can make a contribution to that so that when a contract is signed, when a deal is done, there's at least a bit of a runway that people have clarity and understanding about what we're going to deliver, and then they can come in and start to do that. I was going to ask you, Jeffrey, in terms of the big organizations, particularly SaaS implementations, are more organizations pricing into their solutions PMO resources so they actually can start engaging earlier in the process? Or is it still almost like, for want of a better term, an afterthought or a value add?
So I think the model for PMO is still pretty diverse. There are organizations to where there's a PMO, and um, the project managers are loaned out to different projects, and in some cases, there's a chargeback
Yep.
model to those projects, and in other cases, it's just a cost of doing business within the company. Um, I've worked on large large scale enterprise programs to where we actually built our own PMO for that was dedicated solely to the project,
Yeah.
to the program. So I did a number of years at Caterpillar, and so at Caterpillar I sat in PMOs to where, the nice thing there was at Caterpillar is the PMO model was the same across all of the divisions, and then there was a mothership, if you will, that took care of the standards and the policies and the governance. Um, but there were larger scale programs that would take place where they would pull a couple people from a PMO and, all right, you're assigned over here, and now you're going to build your own PMO team. Uh,
Mm.
and because the amount of work that was involved, it would be a global effort touching 200 to 400 facilities, things like that. Um, you're going to be full time. So,
Mm.
we want to set up our own PMO here.
Yeah.
On a smaller scale. So I work with businesses of all sizes. Sometimes it's a business owner who, uh, and he's got a couple VPs, but maybe they're doing 100 million, 50 million, and they've got a few project leads, project managers, but people aren't necessarily completely trained in that discipline. So part of it will be skilling them up, but also part of it will be taking a manager from one area who now this is going to be his part-time job, and just putting some of the core fundamentals in place to be able to organize and be able to track and have a dashboard for that portfolio. And albeit it may be small, 6 to 8 projects,
Mm.
eventually that's going to grow. And so those are the type of businesses they want to get out in front of it. And so I work with those as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And so I'm interested also in the concept that you talk about around serving the client before you even meet them, um, and becoming a differentiator in the sales ecosystem, for want of a better term. How can you do that? Because I also want to talk about maybe some best practices from your perspective that people listening to this can think about integrating into their own business. But the concept that you talk about around serving the customer before you even meet them, what's the thought process or the intention behind that, and what's the benefit when you can actually get that done?
So I think part of it is getting to know the client before you get there. As I had mentioned before, is talking with the sales team. What's been discussed? What are their pain points? What's the history? Where did they have some other project or programs that didn't go well, or what have they had that has gone well? What have they seen with maybe competitors that they're trying to model? And really trying to understand what it is. Are there short-term goals? So short-term being within the current fiscal year versus 2 or 3 years out. What are they trying to build?
Mm.
I worked with, so I was on a client engagement with Wells Fargo, and this was right after they had acquired Wachovia Bank, um, and so here they've got an M&A post-integration effort going on, and at the same time they're trying to merge two marketing programs with strongly opinionated brokerage firms, and and I've been in a number of those before, and so you're trying to get everything sorted out simply from what does the marketing vision look like, and then behind the curtains there's, okay, we got to get data straightened out, we got to understand what platforms we're going to use, and there's a lot of that. And so having those conversations with the other people that while they may be out on the perimeter, they're eventually going to be knee deep in all of this. And
Yeah.
so building those relationships, and again, now that's once you're on site, or you've been in today's virtual world, you're already talking with them. But it's trying to get a read on some of those things that I know what questions to ask, so I can have good constructive listening sessions with the client.
And with that, I'm actually thinking as you're talking that the your type of role and certainly the role of the PMO can become a great sales resource to consult not just to the sales team but also to the customer about what a solution potentially looks like. So you can create not some FOMO, but you can certainly identify some potential obstacles based on previous implementations of a similar process or of a similar system that can become a very good sales resource. So coming back then to the education piece, both internally but also externally, that becomes pivotal because I'm sure there are a lot of organizations that have VP of sales or chief marketing officers, chief revenue officers, and sometimes chief executive officers that just think, oh, we'll just bring project management in when we've got to deliver, we'll just get the contract, versus the ones that have the vision, they say, well, we could use you as a resource before to educate the customer, educate us. So the implementation cycle potentially shortens, but it reduces the risk through the process, which equals dollars.
Correct. And so again, I go back to the Wells Fargo example. I was fortunate enough to where um, when we would go on site, myself and the account director, I was involved in the conversations from the very start on how they were visualizing how the product, how the portal was going to come together, what the features were, the capabilities, and mapping that out,
Mm.
essentially like a product calendar, if you will, before they had even written up the details of the contract to build this out. So we had a contract, of course, to be doing the discovery engagement, but to be involved from that very start helped me in then planning within my PMO because I had about a dozen project managers. Who am I going to pick to work on this? You know, what are their expertise levels in these different areas? And I could speak in confidence then in those conversations with the client. Okay, you know what? We've worked on some things that are similar to this. Have you thought about this idea?
Mm.
Okay, and part of that too was selfish, okay, because I want to try and repurpose some code or something that's gonna, tighten up the development timeline if possible.
But and that's absolutely logical. And when you're thinking about then moving forward, because I'm conscious there'll be people listening to this who are running a sales team, they're a chief revenue officer, maybe even a CEO, and they're thinking, yeah, well, that sounds all great. I think we've got everything in hand. But if there was a Jeffrey Lambert wish list, and you're talking to a CEO or a chief revenue officer or somebody responsible for delivery, revenue, profitability, what would you consider to be best practice and where have you seen this being done really well? Because often we learn from experiences that don't deliver great outcomes, and we think, oh, we've now got to try and improve it. But how do we get ahead of the curve? How do people who are listening to this actually understand that the resource that you provide actually can be a profitable and differentiated service?
I think there has to be an established, so the timeline in developing out that negotiation and that contract, it varies with different prospects and different products, et
Yeah.
cetera. And perhaps even at times the difficulty or the challenges or resistance that may come up, or it can be a short happy path. Um, I doubt that happens often, but along the way, there are certain points that things are discussed that actually are the inputs into the solution, the product. So getting past all the legalese and things like that, and the payment terms, et cetera. There's a certain point in time where things are talked about technical architecture, you know, um, data capabilities, and storage and uh, things that have to do with the development of features. And this is, of course, is if it's a custom solution, but even if it's a SaaS type solution where it's out of the box, okay,
Mm.
you know, understanding what's going to be involved as the client goes in, as I mentioned, from day one into discovery. Okay, having touch points along the way with the PMO and a couple other key folks from technical teams to where we could step in, do a review, even though it's internally, and give that feedback into the sales team. And honestly, if you can get a seat at the table, even on one particular key day when there's a review, those are the things that are super important and certainly add value. And I think that if you start with baby steps, asking for those, uh, dare I say, like mini gate reviews,
Yeah.
uh, it'll prove out its worth to the process. And so down the road, perhaps you even have people on your team where that's all they do is they go and they attend contract negotiations with the sales team.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking that, again, just reflecting on some big deals that I was part of, we had a bid team that was created, and the bid team would have a number of different resources, and those were all costed resources into the implementation and into the proposal. And we would have almost like a facilitator that would run bid reviews through different gates and different stages of the buying cycle. But remembering back, it was rare to have somebody in a project management capacity because they're all almost resources in the engineering design or the pre-sales design and specialists in terms of solution, not necessarily specialists in the implementation of the solution. So to your point, getting involved in that sort of gateway process should be able to help bring some common sense and some practicality to what we can actually deliver, which should enhance the experience that the customer is going to get through the buying cycle to then, I guess, eliminate or at least minimize some of the challenges with the handover from pre-sales to contract, then to delivery, which then enhances experience of the customer.
Right. The people, whatever resources you might bring in from a PMO team and or technical or functional team, um, they've got to have that background, that experience of having done implementations before, because you
Mm,
can't have a person who's going to be speaking theoretically.
yeah.
Um, you know, you've got to have folks who are seasoned, who've done a few of these,
Mm,
and it's second nature to them as far as um, not so much being able to prove that a particular guesstimate on a date, because that will happen sometimes. People say, well, we need to have it by this date. Well, okay, we don't really need to talk about dates, but here's some of the things that I've seen that could become problematic. And so, from a risk aversion standpoint, uh, these are some of the precautions we want to take and the planning we want to take to make sure that we build in some contingency for that.
yeah. Yeah. Love that. So moving forward, um, how do you see the world, particularly with this proliferation, get my words out, of AI and all the stuff that we're happening around technology? When you're looking forward into the next 6 months, 12 months, and beyond, are you filled with a level of anticipation and excitement in terms of what we can do as organizations, how we can add even more value to clients, how we can actually make sure that the implementation of the actual promise is delivered close to the scope? If you just look from a pure implementation PMO perspective, does the next 4 to 5 years fill you with optimism, or is there some caveats to that and some question marks?
So when you speak to it from an AI perspective, I think that the key thing there is um, so from the individual user perspective and the community as a whole, it's going to be education. Okay, so the folks who really take the time to learn, the companies that take the time to train their people so that they understand that AI is more than just about writing good prompts,
Mm,
you know, and you get into the next level down of agents and then agentic workflow, um, and that's a whole nother animal. But you know, it's from an AI perspective. how do you integrate that into the business model? That's the big question right now. That's the big challenge because, companies are seeing a lot of productivity in all different spaces, including the PMO
Mm,
and including in the space of sales, especially like doing quote work, things like that.
yeah.
Um, but and that's great. But how is that rolling up and really impacting the overall business model for the corporation and impacting value streams that go across all the verticals?
Mm,
Okay. So that's one. Another area about as far as what's the next 3 to 5 years hold, and really to be excited about, I think it's the fact that um, I don't think as many jobs are going to go away as people think, because companies that are investing in the utilization of AI and um, engaging with project management to carry out various programs, they're learning and seeing that you actually need some more folks who are specialized in those areas to carry it out. And the whole thing of
mm.
SaaS platforms going away, I don't really buy into that either. I know we had that big SaaS scare about a week or so ago, but the thing is, it's all moving so fast that you can't get lost by focusing in on what the latest tool is today. Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to set the vision. What are our objectives? What are our goals? Decide what are we going to use right now from a sales process perspective, a project management perspective, um, and stick to that. But then stay apprised of what's happening. But then occasionally, well, maybe we should look at this and make some changes, make some adjustments.
Yeah, because I think the fundamentals are still going to hold true. And one thing with AI
Absolutely.
is, particularly in the business to business space, what won't change, certainly in the short term, is the need, the desire, the requirement for humans to continue to build relationships at that executive level. Because what AI can't do at the moment is it can't empathize, it doesn't have feelings. It's good at task stuff, it might be good at flow and process flow, and maybe in some cases design and so forth, but it cannot replace yet the importance of the business to business human relationships. And everyone I talk to, they're saying the same thing. So um, I think we're looking at a future that we've got some challenges ahead of us, but I think we've got some great opportunities to take advantage of as well. And places like the PMO within organizations have a really pivotal part to play in the implementation of those great solutions.
Yeah, other thing that I've seen become more prominent now also is and growing in popularity is, you know, you, you build out a solution or you're delivering a product, or even if it's you're doing a retooling of a factory, a facilities upgrade, right before you go live, whether it be a couple months, a couple weeks, but there's a readiness checklist.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And, you know, are we ready? What do we need to circle back on? Is there training, et cetera? Do we have a punch list that needs to be done? Now we're seeing more in this space. So it started with SaaS a couple of years back, but readiness assessments in advance. So not just from an organizational change management perspective, but
Hmm.
from a technical and functional perspective. All right. So what does it look like from a readiness perspective? And so that was SaaS, but now with AI is what are the business that companies who are diving into this and don't have things established as to what do we want to accomplish from a business perspective, going back to the business model, what are our
Mm.
objectives, and from there building out a strategy and then assessing it. Are we ready to do this? And if not, what do we have to get dialed in? So it could be
Mm.
simple things like process mapping, value stream mapping. Okay. Do we really understand where the best areas are for us to apply this effort and the dollars that follow, the money that follows,
Yeah.
okay, in doing this investment? Because companies are spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars, and not all of them are directionally correct in what they're doing, and they're having to take a step back.
Mm. Yeah,
Those are
love
some
that.
of the things that I hear in some of the conversations I'm involved in.
Love it. Love it. So, hey, it's been a great conversation, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. People listening to this, where they'd like to learn a little bit more about you, what you do, and the
Sure.
PM office, where's the best place for them to connect and learn a little bit more about Jeffrey Lambert?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and specifically, I've got a quick little freebie I can throw out there for folks, and you can find that at www.fusionpro-pm.com/FAQs, FAQS.
Nice.
And then I'm also at BlueFusionPartners.com.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll put those on the show notes and certainly encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn and also check out the FAQs, the little
Sure.
freebie that you talk about.
A little freebie, and then you know what, and that'll link you to another one after that. I'm launching a training portal and with digital products on that, and that actually is taking place here in the next couple of weeks. So we're
Nice.
excited about that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Jeffrey, thank you so much on a Tuesday evening in Chicago. I greatly appreciate you doing some overtime to talk to me this morning in Melbourne on the podcast.
Well, you
So
know, I work the different hours and I enjoy it. So
well, it's just great the technology that we've got available to us today to be able to speak to somebody on the other side of the world, and it's almost like we're in the same room, but the technology works and different time zones,
exactly.
and it's just awesome. So one of the benefits from COVID, certainly Zoom has sort of taken off with that. So I gotta love
This
that.
is true.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, it's been an
Darren, I
absolute pleasure,
enjoyed
my friend.
myself. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Great conversation and all the best in your business as you continue to expand.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.